Kim is an animal rights advocate, an author, and independent scholar. He has experience in leadership positions from some of the world's foremost animal advocacy organizations. Today, Kim will talk about how to establish animal rights as a mainstream political issue, a topic that I think is really, really important. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you very much, Sasha, and everyone involved with the conference. And it's very impressive. I'm learning a great deal, which is very helpful to me. And I want to pledge my commitment to help you further post the conference if there's anything I can do. But it's very clear to me from all these presentations so far, they're all interrelated. And there is going to be some issues that I'm going to touch upon that's been spoken about before. And the basic premise is this, which is that I believe animal rights and welfare, whatever you want to call it, needs to become a mainstream political issue. And by a mainstream political issue, I mean it should be seen as an issue within the political universe alongside things like housing, the environment, defense, and so on. It needs to become a political institutionalized issue. And I'm going to address that in my presentation. There's going to be a little bit of history, a little bit of an argument that I'm going to make about how social movements progress, and we'll see how we end up, and hopefully there'll be a little bit of time at the end. So these are the topics that I'm going to quickly take you through, and I want to quickly tell you about myself, which is that I became a vegetarian in 1973 because I worked in a chicken slaughterhouse. Well, I worked in a chicken slaughterhouse in 1973, then I became a vegetarian in 74, and I've been a vegan since 1976. And since then I've been involved with organizations in Britain, and in principally Britain and the USA, but also increasingly in Europe and elsewhere. And there's a book there that I encourage you to read, which talks about the work that I'm going to talk about now. So putting animals into politics then. We've been touching upon the theory of the political turn in animal ethics, although that phrase hasn't actually been used today. But there is very much an increasing number of academics addressing the political turn in animal ethics. Robert Garner has been in the forefront of this. He's at University of Leicester in England, and there have been others, and I just want to reference them there. And I see them very much as being the theory to match the practice of putting animals into politics, which is what I'm addressing here today. So I'm going to take you back to 1977, when the RSPCA held a Rights of Animals Symposium at Trinity College, Cambridge. And at that symposium, and there was a book published of the papers, and if you're interested in the history of ideas to do with animal ethics, I highly recommend that book to you, because it did encapsulate what the thinking was in 1977. But at that conference, they also signed a declaration against speciesism, which is reproduced in the book. And it's interesting for me to sort of begin with a reference of speciesism, because that is the basic prejudice that we're dealing with, where one species dominates all others. Now, that conference in 1976 was to celebrate was partly to do with the celebration of the centenary of the Cruelty to Animals Act of 1876. And this was the legislation in Britain that dealt with the misuse of animals in research. So 100 years later, in 1976, even though it was one of the oldest pieces of legislation to do with animals, it was a legislation that dealt with animal research. And there was a call on its centenary to bring recognition to that and demand that there should be new legislation. So a campaign was organized called Animal Welfare Year, and it had these three primary goals. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to read this out to you. I'm going to let you look at it and quickly take it in. And if the slides are distributed afterwards, then you can do this at your own leisure. But the goal of the campaign primarily was to say that animals were a political issue. And the interesting thing about the campaign is that it began to identify, and this is in the mid-1970s, primary areas of concern: farm animals, animals in research, companion animals, and wild animals. And it began to bring order to the sort of all the conversation and history of all the animal advocacy work that's been going on up to that point in time. And there were two key players who helped bring about the campaign called Animal Welfare Year. Lord Houghton of Sowerby is the first one I want to mention, Now, what's interesting about Lord Houghton is that he was a full-time politician. He was a Labour member of Parliament. He became a Labour peer. That's in our unelected House of Lords. And he was an animal welfarist. And he wanted to help the animal movement learn how it needed to become a political movement. So he was the chair of the campaign. And because he was external to the movement, he played a role that was a bit like a midwife, if you like. He was free from all the, let's recognize this, all the petty discussions and disputes that go on and between and among organizations. He was able to sort of say, you know, I'm coming to you as someone who cares about your work, but I'm external to all of you. I'm not submerged into all the differences and agreements that might be going on, but I need to tell you this is the vision you need to have if you want to achieve the work you want to do. The second person I want to talk about briefly is Clive Hollands, who was an animal welfare person. He ran an organization based in Edinburgh that campaigned against animal research, and he was part of the architect behind the idea of the Animal Welfare Year. So Lord Houghton's challenge that he said at the RSPCA's Animal Rights Conference that I mentioned in 1977 was that animal issues must go to Parliament. We have to go to Parliament. There's no choice in the matter. Now, I know this is probably something you think, yeah, right, we know all this already, but I want to take this back to the point in time when this really began to gel, at least in Britain, and I think hopefully had a positive impact around the world. So his challenge was that to bring animal welfare within the policies of the political parties, which I'm going to come back to, and therefore into the realm of government responsibility. So I think that one of the things that the animal movement does not do well at is organizing within the political parties, so that we can identify people who are members of political parties who care about animals, is to get them together and to work within that political party to advance that party's position on animals. There is very good work going on that in Britain, which I'm most familiar with, but I know it also happens in other countries. But this is where I think the heart of the challenge is, as I say it, is that we need to organize within the political parties, because it's the political parties and the candidates who get elected to form governments. And what we want to see is governments elected who come with commitments to animals when they come into power. Does that make sense? So GCAP, which is the General Election Coordinating Committee for Animal Protection, was a succeeding campaign to Animal Welfare Year. And this campaign was launched around the time of the general election of 1977. So what I'm now sort of moving into is what did we do in the mid-1970s at the time of a general election to advance animal issues, to achieve the goal of getting a political party with commitments to animals elected to form the next government. My God, there are people going swimming out there. It must be freezing. So the GCAP campaign was on a national and local strategy with the same objectives, the same goals. So what did GCAP do? We published manifestos, which I'll look at in a minute. We attended party conferences. We organized fringe meetings at the party conferences with speakers and with people from those political parties who were sympathetic. We also lobbied the national political parties as well. And we mobilized through this coordinating committee which consisted of organizations, animal welfare groups. So we maximized our impact by getting as many groups to become part of this committee to then advance the same program of issues. And we generated a lot of media interest. So let's take a quick look at the first manifesto which GCAP published. So GCAP was a General Election Coordinating Committee for Animal Protection, and it was a coalition of some 30-odd organizations, if I remember correctly. And we declared in this document that cruelty to animals is not a private matter. It is the responsibility of government, the primary areas of concern, and we also targeted marginal constituencies. So constituencies or districts, I'm not quite sure what word you use to describe them in your countries, but basically this is, an elected person is elected to represent an area. So we call them constituencies. But there are constituencies where there's a small swing vote could affect who gets elected. So we targeted those marginal constituencies in order to elect candidates who came with the best promises for animals, and also to work against the candidates who had the worst commitment to animals. So the document, this is just one-page spread inside, I'm sorry it won't be very legible to you, but at the top it says intensive animal husbandry. This was the language of the time in the 1970s. And what the document did was lay out a series of demands of what was needed to be accomplished at that time. Now, it's the outcome that is the most important thing, because the outcome of all this activity was that in the general election 1979, for the first time in Britain, the political parties' manifestos, which they stood on at the time of the election, for the first time they included commitments to animal welfare. Before this point in time, they said nothing about animals. So this is a significant turning point. And this was in 1979, so we can look back and critique whether they could have been stronger than what they are, but they were there, and they were saying generally very good things. Then I'm going to skip through, this is the actual language from the manifesto here. They're all online. You can find them and read them. I'm going to jump now to 1983, which was when we had the next general election, which is for our country's sins, was when Margaret Thatcher got elected, and she didn't get my vote. And this is the publication that we produced under GCAP, Animals and Politics, The Connection is Your Vote. And so we updated our manifesto. We called for a permanent council for animal protection, priority areas of concern. Again, it was a coalition of organizations. And this is the spread from this particular manifesto of factory farming, and we were more focused in the demands that we're making and the issues that we were bringing attention to. So as a result, in 1983, the general election manifesto commitments from the major political parties again had animal issues in them. And the Labour one is particularly interesting because it begins to sharpen up its focus of opposition to hunting, blood sports, fox hunting, deer hunting, stag hunting, and so on. I'm going to skip these because this is the text from each of the manifestos. Also, what was happening as a result of these campaigns was that the political parties themselves began to think about the animal issues, because we were forcing them to do so, and they began to write and produce their own position statements about animals. And these are the covers of two documents that the Conservative Party published about animals in 1979 and 1981, and I have copies of them in my archive in my office. And so this was the beginning of the thinking of the political parties as to what they believe and think about animal issues. The Labour Party also published documents. The one on the left, the yellow one, is 1978, which was a background briefing document, and it was quite extensive. It was a very good document. And then this is one, more updated one from 2015. I include these examples to make the point that one of the outcomes of our efforts over the years has been to actually get the political parties themselves to start thinking and writing about animal issues. Very recently, Labour launched an animal welfare manifesto. As you know, we're in a process of nervous breakdown, maybe having a general election. And I just want to mention the fact that, because I think Jeremy Corbyn, who's the leader of the Labour Party, does deserve some credit, because the picture on the left here, this is me, and the man standing up is Jeremy Corbyn, and this picture was taken in 1983 when we held a rally in his constituency against a research laboratory. And so he's been vegetarian since then, I'd give recognition where recognition deserves. This is just a bit of a fun photograph of Corbyn there. I have a love-hate relationship with Corbyn, but that's another matter. The next slide, I also want to show to you two other things that happened around this time of examples of putting animals into politics. On the left, The Liberator is a newspaper that I used to co-edit that was published by the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection, now Cruelty Free International. And we produced a special issue at a time around the 83 election where we reproduced all the manifesto commitments to do with animals, and we discussed them all and we made clear what our preferences were. And then also another outcome of this mainstreaming of animal politics is this document on the right is another project I was involved with, which was the London Borough of Islington, which again is Jeremy Corbyn's constituency. They published in 1983 a policy statement on animals. So they were the first local elected government in Britain to actually adopt a position that was pro-animal. And it was a statement of concern and commitment, but it also meant that they did actually reassign some of their budget away from pest control through to funding spaying and neutering of street-living cats. It was more than just a gesture of intent, it was actually policies that they implemented, which I think continues to this day. Other examples on the left, and I'm going to test you to see if you know who published Hunting Times. And on the right is another page from the Liberator newspaper I edited. And again, there's Corbyn is the figure, the third from the left, yeah. Or the second from the right. He's this one, anyway, whether you're looking left or right. But the Hunting Times was published by a leading British organisation, international organisation, and it published that cover, and it also published this cover, where it made directly the link. Your vote on June 9th could end this, and this is a fox being chased down the road by a pack of dogs in a fox hunt. Now, what I find fascinating is that this is published by whom? Which organisation do you think published this? Okay, I'll tell you then. It's the International Fund for Animal Welfare. In the 1980s, they were very progressive. Not that they're not progressive now, progressive differently. I don't know if they do this now, but I think this is the kind of thing that animal groups should do increasingly. Here's another cover from International Fund for Animal Welfare from the 1980s. How safe are the Tories? The Tories are the Conservative Party, they're the Conservative government, and they were very overtly linking animal issues with human issues. This is the time of Thatcher, a lot of social unrest, etc. Other examples of other groups doing things for animals at the times of general elections. The furthest one over there is published by Animal Aid, a more recent example, you can tell by the design. These are all things, again, from my archives. And this one is published by the League Against Cruel Sports, 2015 Election Manifesto. I also want to highlight, despite my plea that we don't do this enough, there are very good groups working within political parties for animal welfare issues, and one of the best in Britain is a group called Conservatives Animal Welfare Foundation. I also want to recognise the fact that there are green parties and animal welfare parties which also deal with animal issues. And whatever one might say about Boris Johnson, he did actually say this on July 24th, 2019, which I think you should all be able to read. And it's a very curious time at the moment on many levels in Britain. And one of the ones that's most interesting to sort of watch is how the British animal groups are responding to the Brexit situation and how they've had to reframe their campaigns and objectives and work with a government that historically hasn't been particularly sympathetic towards animals, but Boris Johnson, largely influenced by his current partner, has been outspoken about animal issues and the environment. I think that there is some depth of feeling about these issues within Boris Johnson, but he's such a proven liar, how can we trust him? So I won't go too far down that road. I'll get myself into trouble. So one of the other outcomes I wanted to mention is that because of all these campaigns to do with general elections, and because there's been a consistency of focus on issues in order to target them over a period of time, and it takes time to achieve social change, but we should recognise that in the UK, we have had important legislation to do with animals. There's the Animal Scientific Procedures Act, which replaced the Cruelty to Animals Act of 1876. Fur Farming Prohibition Act, it's illegal to raise animals for fur in England and Wales. The Hunting Act, which is essentially stopped the killing of wildlife by a pack of dogs, but it's still problematic. It needs to be tightened up, which the Labour Party's been talking about. The Animal Welfare Act, which the Conservative government introduced, which recognised the duty of care on behalf of people for the animals in their care. And there's also been a whole slew of legislation to the EU. And I think these pieces of legislation and others would never have happened if we hadn't initiated in the 1970s and kept going a campaign to put animals into politics. And at the moment, as I'm saying, we're on the cusp of a general election being called for, and the mainstream political parties are going to put out their storefront as to what their positions are going to be about animals if they get elected, and it's all quite fluid at the moment. But these are some of the things which certainly the Conservatives and Labour have been saying. In my remaining time, I want to just switch to more broadly looking about social justice movements and what I've learned over the years about how I understand them and what I see about them and how I feel about animal rights. So I think animal rights, is it a moral crusade or is it a social movement? Is it the duty of the individual or the responsibility of society? And these are fundamental questions which I think that we need to really grapple with and understand. And I think it's both a moral crusade and a social movement. However, for many of us who get involved with animal issues, we've gone through what I call a personal transformative moment, in which it's been revealed to us the way in which animals are abused. And we've changed ourselves. We've changed our thinking. We've changed the products that we buy. We've changed how we live. And that personal transformative moment is so powerful, and it's so personal, and it's so individual, that I think that for many of us who do campaigning for animals, that we kind of think that if only we can create personal transformative moments in other people, they will also change. They'll also become pro-animal, vegan, vegetarian, or whatever. But I've had to realize the fact that I just don't think people are like that. I think there's a large number of people who don't care about animals for various reasons. And we can investigate them. So I think that this is the reason why I think that animal issues is as I go back to, it's a moral crusade and it's a social movement. It's not one or the other, it's both. So moral crusade for those of us who've had those personal transformative moments, but it's a social movement that we need to get animal issues a mainstream political issue, because we want to elect political parties and candidates to form governments who come with a set of commitments to do action for animals. Because at the end of the day, people who don't care as much as we do about animals, they're going to have to be legally enforced to behave in ways in which they care for animals. And there are lots of parallel issues to look at. There's the smoking issue, seatbelts, gay marriage issues, and so on. There's lots of examples to see where I believe this is true. So I've come to the conclusion that social movements go through 5 stages. I admit this is a bit simplistic, but I think it helps me understand, it helps me assess where I think we're progressing or not progressing. It makes me take a picture of the whole movement, take a picture of an organization or a particular issue. So there are 5 stages. You can read this, I'll just say they're public education, public policy, legislation, enforcement, and public acceptance. Now, last week I was speaking at a political science conference and people were questioning me about why did I make public acceptance the last stage. Well, I think that we go from public education, where we educate people who do not know, get them to understand the issues, and as we progress and educate more people, which I think is generally happening, I think as generations come along, I'm old enough now to be able to see that as younger generations come along, they're more aware of animal issues than they were certainly when I was in my youth, misspent youth. So the public acceptance is the final stage, is because that's where I think everyone goes around saying, oh, we've always thought this about animals all the time, and forgetting the fact that we haven't. So another way I look at these 5 stages is through this very simple chart. And the point I'm making here is that as we progress through these 5 stages, and I'm arguing that we have to be active in each stage as we progress through them, we can't think, all right, today we're going to switch from stage 1 to stage 2. We have to be active in each one as we progress through them and grow and learn how to be active in the successive stages. But as we go through each of those 5 stages, our ability to influence society increases. And specifically, as a social justice issue progresses through each stage, its influence and resistance to setbacks increase proportionately. So our ability to fight what I would call the animal-industrial complex is stronger as we progress through each of those 5 stages. And if you think about the industries that use animals and the work that they do, and we were talking about this earlier with education, they're all basically active already in each of these 5 stages. I'm not convinced that we are, or as much as we should be. I think we've got a lot to go, but a lot to learn, a lot to improve the work that we do. Does this make sense? Yes. Good, thank you. That's a relief. Now, I want to just sort of quickly critique a couple of campaigns. Now, how many of you heard about the $1 Million Vegan Pope campaign? Okay, a few of you. So there was a group in Britain that said they issued a press release that said, we will give $1 million to the Pope if he went vegan for Lent. And I thought, it's a cheap publicity shot. It's a good idea. It did get some press. This is from the Guardian, the good old Guardian. And but it didn't get anywhere. And I thought, if we go back to this, that's really just stage 1. That's a stage 1 campaign. Now, if we really wanted to change the Catholic Church's position on animals, we'd be active in stage 2. We'd be working within the church, within communities around the world, to advance animal issues and present it to Catholics that integral to their Catholic belief is a commitment to helping animals. It's a very strong commitment, and it's increasingly being written about by scholars. But that campaign didn't do that. And I think that we need to begin to think about all the activities we do is how would we evaluate those activities by these 5 stages. So I was a bit underwhelmed by the $1 Million Vegan Pope campaign, to be honest, because I thought that it's just a quick thing, won't get anywhere, be forgotten about. And even you didn't. Many of you didn't hear about it. I know it was in Britain, but Britain is a country that shoots above its weight. Okay, now direct action, or it used to, but not anymore now. Anyway, Direct Action Everywhere is a US group, and the reason why I have them here is because they're another bad example of putting animals into politics, where they're interrupting rallies of presidential candidates. They stormed the stage, and it was disowned at some point. But where there were American presidential candidates being on the stage, being quizzed, this guy here grabbed the microphone off of one of them and started talking about animal rights. And I thought, this is not what I'm talking about. What we've got to do is work with elected representatives, work with people who run political parties, get them to understand the issue and get them to adopt policies which are positive to animals, and not fight them as if they are vivisectors or animal researchers or factory farmers. So this is what I think about when I think about putting animals into politics. Join a political party of your choice and work from within. Frame animal rights as integral to a just society. Stand for election for public office. Support those pro-animal groups that are working from within the political parties. Every campaign should have a political component. Elect candidates and political parties to offices and governments committed to act for animals. And if this is not something that you like, or if this is something where you're just hostile to politics and you think they're all crooks, then don't do it. You don't have to do it. You let those who believe in this activity do it and advance the animal issues. Now, a good example I want to talk about is Eurogroup for Animals, big fan of theirs. And they did a Vote for Animals 2019 campaign. And they had all these organizations across Europe involved in that campaign. And they ended up with 117 candidates who took the Animal Welfare Pledge, who got elected out of just over 1,000 who made the pledge. So they've identified 117 successfully elected candidates who are now representatives in the EU, who signed their pledge in the election to help animals. So they've got 117 MEPs who they know, who they now can work with. So the pledge dealt with, again, the areas of concern: animals in farming, wildlife, horses, pets, animals in science, and so on. And very quickly, yes, Cory Booker, one of a number of US presidential Democrat candidates at the moment. He is vegan, and I'm sorry, this is all very small font, but you can look it up. And there's also Julian Castro, who's also published, he's the first of the Democrat presidential candidates who's actually published a statement about animals. These are all available on their website. So I'm encouraged to see that in the Democrat presidential campaign, animal issues are being raised. So that, I think, is just a summary of what I've been saying. I want to quickly mention now 2 bicentenaries. 2022 is the Martin bicentenary. So how many of you know the Richard Martin's Act? Oh, 1 or 2 of you. So this was a law passed in 1822, which was by the British government for England and Wales. Ill Treatment of Cattle Act. I think it was all England, just England and Wales. Ill Treatment of Cattle Act. It was the first national legislation that you could deem as being an animal welfare law. So that was 1822. So in 2022, we have a bicentenary to bring attention to the fact 200 years have passed since the first national legislation. What do we as a movement want to be in the next 20 years or 200 years as far as legislation for animals is concerned? This is a golden opportunity to use as a way to help us further our objectives. Then the second bicentenary is in 2024, which is the RSPCA's bicentenary. So in 1824, there was a meeting in London that eventually led to the formation of what was then first called the SPCA, but became the RSPCA in 1840. So 2 very important bicentenaries. I know they're Britain, but they are the first of their kind. And I think that regardless of the fact that they're in Britain, we around the world, and I'm trying to address this around the world, should use these bicentenaries as opportunities to advance our goals of making animal protection, animal rights, a mainstream political issue. And if you want to know more in a more academic article, I had a chapter published in this book, but I want to leave you with this, where you can get in touch with me. And this is a picture taken of me in the mid-1980s. This is Karl Marx's tomb, and this dog was Gandhi. So I was very honored to be with Marx and Gandhi in the 1980s. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kim. And we have time for a few questions. Yes?
Thank you very much, Kim. A very interesting talk. I'm Jess Harfeld from Aalborg University. You have taken great care not to actually tread into the area of the political theories and ideologies of these different parties. For example, you said join a political party, any. So my question is, how in this series, and I love that you ended with Marx, because certain types of Marxism, for example, is detrimental to animal welfare, I would say, equally as types of capitalism or something like that. So how do you see the ideologies and theories of the political parties play into this?
This picture is really a bit of a joke. I mean, don't take it too seriously. Oh gosh, that's a question that should be put to someone like Robert Garner, the political theorist, who has written extensively about animals from a political scientist's point of view, and has written about animal issues viewed from various political theories. Let me see if I can very quickly give you a potted response, but don't hold me to it. So, conservatives, they want to conserve. I think there's an element of freedom and wanting to have less state interference. But I think there is a in Britain there's a so-called one nation state conservatism, which the Conservatives have been very progressive on some social justice issues, like gay marriage, for example, and they are quite progressive on certain animal issues. So I think there is a certain amount of, I'm not really answering your question very well, but there are in the conservative ideology, I think there is sympathy for animals. I think they're against, really, if they were pushed, real cruel treatment of animals, and they would want to see some sort of sense of, I don't know if justice is the right word, but some sense of dignity accorded to animals. Labour, well, there's quite a lot written about the parallels between the way animals are abused by the industrial complex and their labour and their lives, and parallels to that, to the exploitation of labourers and working class people generally. And the Lib Dems, well, gosh, Lib Dems, they wobble all over the place, don't they? Sit in the middle of the road. I think they sort of pick and choose from either end. I'm not a fan of Lib Dems. But I think the important thing is that, and I was thinking about this earlier with the various religions, and the person who spoke for me about dignity was making the point that, generally speaking, whether you're talking about political ideologies or theories, or whether you're talking about various organized spiritual belief systems, there is, I think, to be found amongst them all something good being said about animals. It may be not what we want, may not be strong enough, but I think there is something there to work with.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question.
Oh no, not you.
Thanks, Kim. Inspiring as always. Very important issue. I've got two questions, if I'm allowed. The one thing is, are you yourself involved in political activities and parties maybe? And if yes, how's your experience concerning the animal rights issue, not the animal welfare issue? How's the response in this aspect? Sorry, I'm Krishna Singh from Peter, Germany, so we've got contacts to several political parties, and some of them really are quite open to the animal rights issue on a low level, but not on the higher levels, because they're just afraid of getting into trouble with this. So how's your experience in this field? And second questions, I'm sure you've realized that there's always also fascist parties using animal welfare as a vehicle to promote themselves as being a social movement for the good. I think I don't want to go into that too much, but for Britain, I know is something in operating in this direction. How's your opinion on this? Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I think the latter question is far more the important one to really answer, to be honest with you. I understand animal rights as part of a larger social justice issue. I see the part of a continuum across a broader platform of issues to do with the environment, with the way in which people are treated. And if I see right-wing political parties holding pro-animal issues, I think they should still be rejected and not accepted and should be called out, because their ideology is such that they are as prejudiced against other species, other beings, and there's just no room for it. I would not want to see animal groups supporting a right-wing political party because of their position on animals, because I think there's a bigger issue here. And I think that one of to also address one of the points you're making about how you're having some success locally but not nationally, I think that with nationally we have to be careful about how we frame our messaging to the national leadership of the political parties, because we need to be smart in situating it within the ideology that he was asking about. But also we need to situate it so that they understand animal issues more broadly, that it's to do with not only the intrinsic treatment of animals, but also the fact that animals don't produce food. And if we want to feed the population, animals don't do it. And that if we wanted to create health and well-being, the use of animals in research is really problematic. So I think we need to situate the animal issue within that progressive agenda and frame it within the political ideology of that party. As for the first question, I have been a member of the Labour Party. I'm no longer a member of the Labour Party for various reasons, which are too tedious to go into. And I'm quite happy to say I'm not a member of the political party right now, and that it gives me a better platform to be able to say what I've just said. I'm not, someone can't accuse me of saying, well, you're a member of X party and you're just wanting to fulfill their agenda. Does that answer your question?
Thank you so much, Kim.
Thank you.